All right, welcome back. It is JC and Morgan here on a Monday, our first installment of the month of March, and happy to be joined. As I mentioned at the top of the show, we've had just about everybody I can think of on a national basis that covers the sport well, except for this gentleman. And Ross, you and I don't know each other. We haven't crossed paths. I know we know all the same people. But I was saying at the top, I've really been a fan of your work here because every time I look at a big story, it's either you or Thamel, right? You guys are like breaking everything. So let me start with what I started with at the top. On Friday, like we're wrapping up another show, and it's like, okay, everything's done. And then I take a look at your timeline at the last second on Twitter, and you say, oh, by the way, after meetings this week, college leaders are expected to finalize recommendations to adopt the long-expected player-to-coach helmet comm system, use of tablets on the sideline, and yes, a 2-minute warning. That combined with all of your work covering on the expanded playoff from 12 to 14, which seems like an inevitability. So obviously the lead question for you would be on all the stories you broke, UMass going to the MAC. That's what we want to talk about. What was that like covering that story?
I didn't cover it at all.
Well, shame on you then. All right, that's it. This interview's over.
Come on, man.
I pick and choose these days, and that was one I did not choose.
No, but in all seriousness, can you think, like, we get it. Like, this is what the NFL does. The NFL has made it a 12-month out of the year sport where you just can't ignore it. I mean, the draft coverage alone, that gives you 2 months of stuff, if not more. College football is now in that space. So for you as a guy who covers it, and you're always looking for stuff to write about, this has got to be like the gift that keeps on giving. It's like the Jello of the Month Club from Cousin Eddie.
Well, it certainly produces a lot of content for us, right? The dysfunction within college athletics these days does have a benefit in a way for us. At the same time, it would be nice. Well, two things. It would be nice to sometimes have a longer stretch of an off season that doesn't really exist anymore. And the second thing is, we as in college specific football media used to spend a lot of us writers used to spend the off season traveling campuses and writing features and writing about players and writing about coaches and getting to know them. It's harder to do that with the news cycle, and it's kind of unfortunate.
Of the stories surrounding the 14-team playoff possibility, first off, when did you first hear that was a possibility, and what facet of it, whether it's the automatic bid part of it, whether it's the Big Ten and the SEC kind of running roughshod over everybody else, that facet of it, what chapter of that book has kind of thrown the biggest curveball for you covering the sport?
Well, I think we first mentioned the 14 or 16 team possibility probably over a month ago in a story. The Big Ten commissioner had held private conversations with other commissioners about the 14 team format. And so that was something that seemed to be a thing heading into that initial meeting really a month ago. And then heading in a couple of weeks ago, and they met again and kind of narrowed it down into this model. So it was kind of expected. And then, leading into that meeting, we had reported that SEC Big Ten wanted multiple, automatic qualifiers. So this was kind of been a long time coming, probably many months of private conversations, especially with those SEC Big Ten leaders. So it was kind of always drifting into this direction. I think that the big surprising change for many people, including to a degree me, was the concept of the bye. The two byes would be solely, exclusively held by the Big Ten and the SEC champion. That was something that I think kind of surprised some people, and certainly has gotten some pushback more than just the model in general.
So I'm Florida State. Let me just follow up on that. I'm Florida State. I go 12-0 in the ACC. Then I win the conference championship game. I have a win over Florida. That used to be a big time thing. We'll see if it is under year 3 of Billy Napier. And I've got all the metrics on my side, and I'm told by the committee, that's great, but you don't play in the SEC or the Big Ten, so therefore you have no chance of getting a bye. Is that not going to cause a little more pushback? And if so, is the feeling among the two pillars of the sport now, Petiti and Sankey, yeah, that's great, but that's the bylaws, my friend. It is what it is.
Well, yeah, I mean, in this scenario, that would happen, and obviously, it would that would cause a lot of issues, and it's why I think the ACC specifically, among all the leagues, all the FBS leagues, I think the ACC specifically has raised real concerns about the bye concept. Because if you do the math from the last 10 years or so, and I've seen some of the numbers, I can't name them off exactly right now, but I recall the Big Ten and the ACC would have almost split the getting a bye, over the last 10 years. Big 12, I don't think would have gotten any. But the ACC and the Big Ten would have split them. The SEC would have got one, I think, virtually every year. So if I'm the ACC, I'm thinking that, my team has locked up, has been number 1 or number 2 seed going into a playoff for half the time in the last decade or so. And so that's tough to swallow. And that's why I think you are seeing some pushback on that.
Yeah, and I'm not so sure that even if you look beyond the Champions Ross, that there aren't some years. 2016 comes to mind. The ACC was really quarterback heavy that year. I think they had the Heisman winner, they had the number 1 draft pick, and then they had Deshaun Watson and a bunch of other guys. That year, there were probably 3 good teams in the SEC, and one of them was Auburn that went to the Sugar Bowl at 8-4. So I don't think it's one thing to say, on average that those 2 are the best conferences, but it's not every single year. We already have a net ranking in basketball that, in my opinion, is based much more on style of play than wins and losses or perception. Are we getting away from where winning trumps all in sports, where we're adding these ancillary things on to what makes a good team and what doesn't?
Well, we certainly seem to be confused on how to select teams. It does seem to be that we're kind of college sports is kind of caught football in general in this in an issue over how to select the teams. And I think it's funny because it started with the bowls, and that's how when you look at the evolution of picking a champion, right? You started with matching up teams 1 and 2 into a bowl game, and the bowl games were selected by through the polls, and so people, and then you went to the BCS, right? You went to the opposite. You went to computers, and that caused a lot of issues, and so you went back to people and basically polls. With a specific committee, not necessarily a group of writers, but a specific committee with, I think, just one media member or former media member on the committee. And so you pick those stakeholders like within the industry to pick. And now we seem to be going toward a more professional model where you pick it based on like conference standings, which I don't have a problem with because it does take out a lot of subjectivity. However, there are years where the 3rd best Big Ten SEC team, and certainly the 2nd best Big 12 and ACC team doesn't necessarily deserve a spot. I think through the years you could see that. We've had trouble. This is a long-standing issue for college football in how to pick a champion, and we seem to still having a lot of trouble.
Well, let me ask you this, and I'll kick it back to Mike. I think that these home playoff games are being kind of undervalued in this whole thing because, like, for example, if you're Georgia and you go and you lose to Bama, their fans are walking out of the stadium in Atlanta putting calling their buddies from Moultrie, putting their home game tailgate together for another weekend in Athens. I mean, that's special, right? And they just lost the championship, whereas Alabama fans are trying to book a flight to Phoenix. Why not just go to 16 and have 8 campus games in the first round? I think these buys into the bowls are being a little bit overvalued because you're really just talking about one more game, 2 more teams if you go to 14. What in your opinion is the thought process there?
Yeah, it does seem like when we went from 2 to 4, and then we went from 4 to 12 over the last couple of years, it seemed to be that next evolution was 16, not necessarily 14. I think, for the Big Ten SEC, I think getting, having reserving 2 buys for itself was part of the strategy, and having 14 and being able to just have buys. I think there probably is some issues with TV and TV windows. You start getting into broadcasting window issues, because that's 2 more. I think that's 2 more first round games, right? Right now you had 6, and you'd have 4 because you'd have no buys, and you have 2 more teams. So you'd have 2 more games. So that gives you 8. I mean, playing 8 games on a weekend with TV windows and stuff certainly could pose a problem. You only have certainly so many windows, but it's certainly a good point, and it would seem that was the next evolution. That's why I know a lot of people were a little surprised or miffed about the 14 team, but maybe it is the SEC and Big Ten giving themselves an opportunity to sit out the first round.
Well, and this is not inside knowledge based. I haven't talked to Greg Sankey or Tony Petitti about it, but I do think there is a genuine concern that if and when we go to 16, what is the motivation of, for example, the SEC championship game? Are you just playing for seeding at that point as opposed to a bye? And the SEC championship game has been one of the most special events on the college football calendar. Like, it's one of the few conference championship games that means something. It's sold out every year. There's high stakes involved. If you go to 16, I don't think a team would ever, with self-respect, would ever do this. But you even have people saying, well, why don't you just rest some players? Why don't you just, what is going to be your ultimate motivation if it's 100% for seeding and that is all?
Well, I think you bring up a good point about the championship games, and even at 14, let alone 16. I think even at 14, under the current model that's being bantered about, there are questions about the future of championship games. Even at 12, I think there were questions about the future of championship games for a variety of reasons. One, certainly this 14-team model disincentivizes championship games in most leagues. If your top 2 are going to make it automatically, there's that. Number 2, it's timing. If you do get rid of championship games, the whole schedule can move up. You can move the playoffs up so they don't infringe too much on the NFL and get too much into January. That's something that administrators have wanted to do for a while, and they've been talking about doing it. They really want the semis to be on New Year's Day, and that is kind of an essential piece. In order to do that, you have to move up everything. So for a lot of reasons, the future of championship games is certainly in question. I think you'll see more and more people talk publicly about that. The problem is, to determine your top seed, if you get into a tiebreaker situation, it can be a real problem. That could be a real issue.
Yeah, it's not one you want to go to a coin toss on. Ross Dellenger of Yahoo Sports joining us here on JC and Morgan. Let me refer to another one of your tweets. I love this one because you included a glass of, I think that's bourbon on the rocks. I don't know if that's Woodford, Buffalo Trace, what you got cooking there. We can get to the bottom of that in a moment. but you tweeted out, "State of college sports: no real transfer policy, cannot police NIL inducements, may owe $3 billion in NIL back pay. 3 cases may deem athletes employees. 1 Ivy League school unionizing. Heated fight over a college football playoff format. Hot discussion of an NCAA split. And a school suing its league to exit." Yeah, I would say it's a pretty busy offseason.
Yeah. Yeah. Other than that, everything's pretty good.
Everything is kosher. By the way, what's the bourbon? What are you choosing there?
I'm not a specific, bourbon guy as far as I need just one that I always drink. I rotate quite a few. Woodford certainly being one, as you mentioned there, Bullet, Makers. So there,
Solid.
I kind of play the field.
Healthy rotation.
You're still in Louisiana, right? You still live in Louisiana?
No, I'm in DC. I've been in
DC now, right?
5 years. Yeah.
Washington DC. Well, you still got those Louisiana roots, so bourbon,
right.
obviously. I know a lot of people down there. Ross, real quick, just kicking it back to you. Like, so you've had like a meteoric. Is that how you say it?
Meteoric,
a fast rise in our industry, man. I remember, I think you were covering the LSU beat for Gannett for a while, and I've always been familiar with your work. Talk about what it's like to take it to the next level. I mean, some people can talk about it. Some people can have the title. You earn it. You're one of the few people out there who just reports. And when you give your opinion, it's like, hey, here's my opinion, but you guys decide. As a reader, I appreciate that so much. You could just kind of talk about your style and your career and how you've gotten to where you're at here, and probably the most interesting time in the history of our sport to cover it.
Yeah, well, I do. One of the goals of mine always is to report fair and accurate, and let the readers decide and keep my opinion out of it. It gets harder these days with social media and with like podcasting and stuff like that to not give your opinion, but I try to let the facts kind of speak for themselves. When I was younger in my career, probably didn't do that enough and learned from it a little bit. There were growing pains, I think, in my career. And, it has been a pretty, crazy 5 to 7 years or so. As you mentioned, I covered LSU for the Advocate there in Baton Rouge and the New Orleans Thomas-Picayune for 5.5 years or so. And before that, covered Missouri, and before that, I had a stint covering Auburn and did high schools, and so I bounced around the SEC beats, and got the SI job to go national in 2018, summer of 2018, and then moved over to Yahoo in July. It's been great, love it, and just try to carry everything I did as a beat writer. Working hard, fair, accurate, developing relationships and sourcing over. My first couple of years as a national reporter were writing a lot about football, as you might imagine. The last 3 years or so has been writing about sports business a lot in the changing environment of college athletics, which I've kind of embraced. And it's kind of a grind, and it's not exactly why I got into it, but it's important right now. And, it's probably the most important thing is the changes and transformation of college athletics industry.
A number of people obviously read your work. I'm sure there's a good portion of our audience watching and listening now that also kind of came across with you and the introduction to your work, the segments on Paul Feinbaum, right? I mean, it's a vastly popular show. You've been on there a lot to break some major news stories. Here's my question. We're still in a kill the messenger state of mind, right, from fans. And God forbid you do give an opinion, you're going to be crucified over it. What is a story or a segment you had on that show where you took the most heat over, again, just delivering the message?
Well, nothing really compares to COVID.
Yeah.
The COVID season, the COVID summer, reporting around what college athletic leaders were talking about doing, what they ended up doing. I remember being frustrated enough to send out a post on social media in the summer of, COVID summer, think I just recently reported about, the heart issue that, ultimately why the Big Ten stopped or had originally decided not to play football. And we had reported out that story, kind of unearthing that it was because of the heart issue, potentially with
Is that myocarditis?
myocarditis. And so we reported out that story, and it's like I just took all of this criticism for this story, and it wasn't an opinion piece. It was just, here's myocarditis. Here's why the Big Ten says it's shutting down. Whether you think that's right or not is your opinion. I didn't give mine, but I still got slammed for being anti-football and whatever else. And I just reporting out that story. So the COVID year certainly brought out, as it did with many aspects, I think, certainly brought out some passionate feelings. So that was probably the most that I heard from from people about.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Wrapping things up with Ross Dellenger. Ross, give us an idea. I don't want you to, break what you're focusing on right now for obvious reasons, but I would imagine part of the equation is still there's a lot of meat left on the bone with that playoff structure, right? I mean, nothing has been finalized yet. So, I mean, is this something where you're just keeping your ear to the grindstone and trying to put this jigsaw puzzle together to where everybody will know exactly what we're looking at going forward? It used to be spring football would be something for you to follow right about now or on the heels of it. I don't even know where that fits right now in the list of priorities.
Yeah, it's really low. Yeah, I think the next couple of weeks there'll be meetings. We'll know maybe more by the end of this week. Certainly by the end of next week. Conference basketball tournaments are next week, and at the sites, I think there'll be meetings with administrators to kind of more socialize and explore the model. So the next 2 weeks are pretty big to determine, the course of the playoff for 2026 and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any strong take on, are you pro guardrails or anti guardrails? I see you and Wetzel going back and forth on that, and some of the other guys. Do you have any opinion on that at all, or are you just kind of still in report the facts mode?
Yeah, I mean, I try to offer with Wetzel, I try to offer the other side often so we can have a spirited, somewhat debate and podcast. I'll offer the opinion of the administrative side. Certainly for a long time, college athletics, specifically college football and college basketball, uh, ignored change and avoided it. And look, we're here right now. College athletics is here in this place because of really one thing, and everybody will. I think most people who are knowledgeable will agree that there's this one thing that has led to this happening, and it's coaching salaries. And they've just gotten to that point. And if coaches were still making $1 million instead of 6, 8, 10 million, we probably wouldn't be in this situation. But we're here, and administrators, I think, for a long time had put off change, and now they can't put it off anymore.
Yeah, what I always find interesting is the anti-guardrail people constantly like to refer back to the NFL, and I want to just say back, the NFL does have guardrails. It's called a salary cap. It's called contracts. Like, you can't just get up and leave at the flip of a hat whenever you want. Like, it's kind of contradicting what their take is in a lot of ways. You mentioned the podcast. Tell everybody how they can catch that, because I really enjoy the work of both you guys.
Yeah, I think it's called the College Football Inquirer. So me, Dan Wetzel, and Pat Forty. You can catch it on like Apple Music. You can catch it on the Yahoo site, I believe. Wherever you get your podcast, just Google, search it, and it should come up.
And of course, you'll keep doing great work on Yahoo as well. Ross, it's good to finally make some kind of an introduction. Maybe we'll cross paths down the road in person. In the meantime, we'll keep reading your stuff and listening to your stuff. I think you do outstanding work. Thank you so much for taking out the time.
All right, guys. Thanks.